On the kitchen bench lay still warm starches, on the shelf, bundles of keys, and nearby lay a bundle of letters with dried wax seals. The day dragged on in a damp, flat fog, and a salty wind from the tide blew through the window. While the servants counted the sacks of oats, the mistress reviewed the expenses for candles, and the manager cursed the leaky barn roof. A messenger pushed another bundle through the door. It contained neither poems nor confessions. Instead, there were lines about an adult bride's dowry, horses for the road, a plot of land with poor drainage, a judge who promised attention in exchange for order in the papers, and rumors at the fair that were damaging credit. This is intimacy in real time, the bed as an asset, love as the rhetoric of a contract, tenderness as an advance of trust and the risk of default. Dear viewers, welcome. Write to us about which city and country you are watching from, and whether you have encountered correspondence where the personal unexpectedly turned into accounting and law. Leave your comments. Your experience is important. Enjoy listening. We will examine family letters written in Eastern England in the 15th century, where courtly lyricism is replaced by the harsh reality of prose. Marriage as a contract, the bed as collateral, honor as an assessment of assets, and rumors as a threat to liquidity. This story unfolds against the backdrop of the War of the Roses, when the names of Henry and Edward, Lancaster and York broke seals as often as the wind tore roofs off houses. But there are no heroic scenes in the letters. They contain the sticky workings of the court and the market. In one year, adult relatives argue over a dowry. Some demand cash and cloth. Others want the land to be registered as joint property, so that the husband cannot mortgage it without his wife's consent. In another season, the carts get stuck in the Norfolk clay, and a letter informs that the people carrying the chests are delayed for a day, which means that the groom will have to spend the night at an inn, and that means extra coins and extra tongues. By bed here, they don't mean romance, but a place in the house where the chest with linen will be put, where the key to the chest will be kept, and where in the morning they will check if the seals on the bags are intact. The realism is such that every affectionate phrase turns into a question. Who holds the document? Who pays the deposit? Who will vouch for the neighbor usurer? The myth of the unbroken lyricism of medieval love is shattered by these bundles. Where you expect a serenade, there is an inventory of silverware, written down in words and reduced to a list of hallmarks and spoons. Where you expect a duel over jealousy, there is a tedious dispute over the right of inheritance, whether a niece is considered old enough to enter into an independent contract, whether a marriage is considered valid according to canon law, if the ecclesiastical court has not yet decided on the issue of forbidden degrees of kinship, whether a husband can dispose of land received as a joint share, or is obliged to keep it as a wife's share in case of widowhood. The words honor and bed serve as synonyms for creditworthiness. If the spouses quarrel, the neighbors stop lending money. If honor is tarnished by rumor, the guild will not vouch for debt receipts. Letters record this literally. A person with a bad reputation borrows at a higher rate. A house without a peaceful bed is filled with expensive random guests instead of profitable partners. The plot here moves at a snail's pace. The sender warns that the purchase of a strip of land near the mill stream has not been completed. The former owner, an adult with a habit of playing for time, is stalling because better grain prices are expected in the spring. Relatives advise him to take two paths: to the consistory court, to enforce the marriage vow, and to the chancellery, to secure his wife's share through use, a scheme that allows land to be held by trustees to protect it from the husband's debts. In response, news arrives that the chancellor is busy with the war at the council, and the ecclesiastical court is dragging out the proceedings. The clergy need money for the trial and a clerk to transcribe the testimony. Paperwork requires paperwork, and the family learns to play for time. writing to various authorities and keeping witnesses on standby, preferring not eloquence, but old people with memories of boundaries and boundary stones. The first twist comes from the word honor. In letters, it sounds dry and painful. In one message, an adult relative explains that honor is not in poetry, but in the right to inheritance. If the spouse manages to declare his wife disobedient or bad at managing the household, he can slow down the registration of the dowry and temporarily block access to the chests. This is not a moral lesson, but an attempt to buy time from creditors whose deadlines are expiring. On the other hand, honor means the acceptability of an ally. If there are rumors about him because of overnight stays and bad betting, more collateral will be placed on the deal, and he will not receive a position in the sheriff's office. The bed itself, as a place in the house, is recorded through guests, the housekeeper, the keykeeper, and linen lists. Its tranquility is an indicator that the house is solvent. Any nighttime quarrel instantly turns into a daytime interest on the debt. The second twist is related to rumors. The correspondence records how words at the fair turn into numbers in the moneylender's book. A marital conflict among adults spreads through the shops faster than carts, and by the following week, the interest on the old loan is growing. They charge more, demand a guarantor, and postpone the deadlines. Paston's rejection of gossip is not aesthetic, but economic. They calculate who to ask for a letter of recommendation, who to go to for collateral, who to put as a witness in future proceedings. The letters also reveal a darker side. Amid the noise of war, titles and positions change hands, and those who successfully switch sides gain access to judges. Then, the honor of another family becomes a lever. Through rumors and moral decay, the opponent casts doubt on the purity of the deal in the office and drags it out until harvest time, when land prices rise. This abuse of power, as a social fact without details, affects women and men equally. Those with fewer patrons suffer. The third twist is in the bedroom as a household. The letters tell how a house stands or falls because of the body, but not in a romantic sense. Adult wives fall ill after childbirth. Men get gout. Servants wheeze from wet straw. Every season, the cost of doctors, candles, and firewood deliveries breaks the payment plan. The bed is like a foundation of continuity. If the mistress is weak, her sister or aunt takes care of her. If the husband is bedridden, the manager keeps a diary of the work. If there is no peace and quiet, and no warm bed in the house, people leave for other jobs, and the household suffers losses. Love in such letters is not a song, but a willingness to sign up for hardship, to endure winter in a drafty house, to keep their distance from the market, to withstand visits from the bailiff without overspending their remaining credit. The letters do not complain. They calculate how many days the heat lasted, how many candles were used to keep watch by the bed, how much wool had to be sold to pay the clerk. Between the lines, there is another layer at work: the law. Marriage and the marriage bed in 15th century England were a network of jurisdictions. Canon law determined whether a marriage was valid and could be dissolved. County customs dictated the order of inheritance. The chancellor resolves disputes over use, allowing the wife's property to be protected. The common law courts are responsible for ownership and breaches of the peace. In the letters, it looks like a route book. Which court to go to first, who to ask for a hand in the margins to speed things up, which judge favors merchants and which favors lords. And again, intimacy is not a kiss, but a contractual bond. The bed gives the right to a share, but the share is held by seals. The myth versus the document is revealed in the simplest scenes. In one envelope is a meticulous list of fabrics and linen belonging to the wife under the marriage contract, with a note that the chest must be kept in a room where the door is locked with a key, and the key is carried by the wife herself. In another, there is an interesting detail. A dispute over inappropriate behavior turns into a dispute over the right to be present at the inventory of the barn. The word shame is used as an excuse to remove the mistress from business and temporarily deprive her of her influence over the flow of grain. In the third, an old witness describes the boundary as a row of oak trees and an upturned stone. This determines who is recognized as a respected neighbor and who is entrusted with the safekeeping of title deeds. Lyricism, if it appears at all, is a ritual of politeness to ensure that the letter reaches its destination. A couple of gentle lines at the beginning and end, followed by a string of debts, deadlines, and seals. Love here means responsibility for shared risks. When the word honor appears in letters, it means that a heavy dispute over rights to a house, rent, and inheritance is brewing, not a romance. The adult men of the family try to rely on old records of ownership, but each winter washes away boundaries and memories. One letter from Norfolk reports that the boundary ditch has been silted up. The stone markers are overgrown with ivy, the oaks have been blown down by the wind, and the neighbor has claimed that his arable strip stretched further back in his grandparents' time. Behind the phrase violation of family honor lies a tactic of pressure. If the family recognizes the neighboring boundary as questionable, the arguments for the children's right to this land will collapse. In correspondence, this turns into a plan to call adult witnesses who remember the old boundary walks, to send a literate clerk to the office with a request to protect the holding, to instruct the manager to collect farmyard evidence about who paid the rent, when, and for which plot. Honor, in such a situation, is not a feeling, but the reliability of the title. If it is shaken, the woman's dowry will dissolve in the claims of strangers, and the marriage will lose its meaning as collateral. The family calculates the options for marriage policy as dryly as a merchant counts barrels. In their letters, adult women do not remain silent. They directly demand the return of the linen and silver owed to them under the marriage agreement, remind them of the keys, chests, and storage location of documents, and scold them for delays in transporting fabric and hiring servants who do not guard the barn well at night. They note that illness and childbirth disrupt schedules, but duties must be performed and the treasury must be replenished. There is no shame in these lines. On the contrary, they represent direct risk management. If the mistress is weak, the orders are passed on to an older relative. If the husband is away, the keys are handed over to an adult manager against receipt. If the servants are at fault, they are replaced before the fair, because moneylenders come to the fair and check whether the house is being run without scandal. The affectionate overtones in the letters are just lubrication for heavy reinforcement. On top is a benevolent formula, followed by a series of points, each of which concerns money, reputation, and court. Rumors, as in any commercial environment, move faster than a cart. It is enough to mention bedroom quarrels in a tavern, and by the end of the week, the accountant will prescribe an increase in the interest rate on an old loan. In letters, this looks like alarming points. A letter of recommendation from an influential neighbor is required. Otherwise, the creditor will demand a guarantor. A competent attorney must be sent to the parish judge urgently. Otherwise, the opponent will file a petition for unreasonable management of the house and obtain an inventory of property until the dispute is resolved. Adult witnesses must be summoned to the office. Otherwise, the case will be overshadowed by more high-profile lawsuits. There are no harmless gossip here. Each one slips into the line of expenses. The correspondence tells how the family learns to patch up the holes with paper patches, letters to the sheriff, notes to the tinkerers, to repair the roof before the rains, agreements with the miller to grind without waiting in line so that dissatisfied people do not gather at the gate. In the background, a larger noise pulsates, the war for the crown. In some years, the court sides with one king, in others with another, and each turning point threatens a review of patronage. For the family, this is like a fever. Judges change, beneficiaries change their liveries, former patrons disappear, and the letter states without pathos that a gift must be brought to the new office, otherwise the old process will stop. Here, power abuses itself as power knows how to do, and letters respond to this with the craft of survival. Send a messenger with copies of all the papers so that the office cannot lose the case. Keep adult witnesses at the door, ready to appear when called. Pay the copyist in advance so that the petition does not drag on until harvest time. Chains of small payments replace great mercy. When the fate of the supreme power swings, those who know how to keep the paper with them survive. The most painful area is the intertwining of marriage and inheritance. In correspondence, this drags on for years. Adult sons try to assert their rights to land received from a childless relative. On the same page, adult daughters demand payments for dowries and shares of widows' maintenance. At the bottom of the margins is a sheet with a list of expenses for courts, candles, and travel. Every delay in the payment of the dowry affects the choice of suitors. Those with a worse reputation are given a smaller amount and more conditions, up to and including use, where the land is registered to trusted persons so that it cannot be immediately mortgaged for the husband's debt. In one season, the letters report that due to a quarrel between the spouses, the neighbors refused to act as guarantors, and a distant relative had to be brought in with a fee for signing. In another, creditors, sensing tension, demanded not only the future harvest as collateral, but also a chest of linen as a tangible sign of control over the household. Thus, the bed moves from the bedroom to the category of collateral. In the crackling of the winter walls, one can hear how thrift becomes ethics. The letters mention the frost that breaks the servant's hands, the wet straw flooring that causes back pain in adult women, and the endless colds that entail expenses for cloth and wax. The top line remains unchanged. Despite the pain, obligations must be fulfilled. The mistress lists the church days when it is forbidden to work, and those when it is possible, and payments are squeezed through this calendar. In a letter about a simple everyday choice, to patch the roof or send a gift to the clerk, it is decided whether the deal will survive. This grim arithmetic strips language of its rosy hues. Love is given a place where it is measured by fidelity to tiny obligations. To put a bowl of warm water by the bed of a sick spouse, even though tomorrow you have to go to the office. To take off a piece of jewelry to cover the overdue payment to a court official. To preserve the dignity of the home by refraining from nighttime scandals when the neighbor's service is already at the door. Gradually, the correspondence establishes standards that will later be called modernization of the spirit, accounting for debts and obligations, written confirmation of agreements, formalization of witnesses, separation of property and evidence. In this world, everything is based on the fact that legal and economic matters are inseparable. Love here is not a counterweight, but fuel. Where adult spouses argue but continue to be jointly responsible for the courts and the harvest, the house enters winter with fewer losses. Where romance breaks the calculation, extra lines of expenses appear in the spring letter, and by summer, requests for a loan to cover the honor. The documents in boxes by the stairs become the real bedroom of this marriage. The keys to a surviving future are stored there. At the intersection of legal and economic disputes, a compromise emerges, hated by poets, but beloved by bureaucrats. Letters report that after months of mutual complaints, the parties exchanged obligations. The adult wife is granted the right to a portion of the rent in a separate entry. The husband renounces the independent sale of the disputed piece of land. relatives pledge seals for the payment of fabric and dishes until autumn, and in exchange, the family stops making noise at the fair and restrains the tongues of the servants. The agreement seems boring, but it restores peace to the home, where one can finally sleep without fear of a nighttime inventory. Here, the main nerve of the myth and the document is revealed. The legend awaits the victory of feeling over calculation, but the letter, smelling of smoke and dampness, shows something else. It is not pathos that saves, but the sequence of payments and letters. And all this takes place against the backdrop of a muffled war for power, which from time to time draws armed men and new officials to the county. The letters note this briefly. Livestock should be removed, barns closed, and copies of titles kept on hand, because strangers on horseback can easily confuse private property with disputed property. Here, the abuse of power is recorded with restraint, but the consequences are clear. Unnecessary expenses, fear, and a loss of understanding on the part of creditors. In such an environment, the strongest gestures of love are not words, but a willingness to weather the storm together, not to expose the house to rumors, and not to squander seals. Thus, family correspondence becomes an X-ray of the 15th century. Love is like a contract for the joint defense of property. Money is like the blood of the house, and the bed is like a place to store keys and receipts, where every morning begins with reading what the messenger has brought. As long as the seals at home are kept dry and the clerks are well fed, the letters show how the word honor finally becomes synonymous with the right to land. When adult relatives refer to insulting the honor of a wife, it means that the opponent is trying to oust her from the line of heirs and weaken her claim to her widow's share. On farms, fences rot, grain dampens in barns, and carts leave for the office with copies of deeds and notes of trust, where the land is registered to guarantors to protect it from the husband's debts. The letters dryly explain how this arrangement works. Adult trustees hold titles in their own names for the use of the wife, so that her share is not lost in a lost lawsuit. If the husband tries to exchange the land for current debt, the trustees file a lawsuit for breach of trust. Thus, family intimacy turns into a network of legal knots, where the bed is not a place of feeling, but a point of access to documents and keys. The social background becomes harsher. The war for the crown raises and lowers patrons, and letters record that every political upheaval shifts deadlines in the chancellery. One package reports that a judge who was favorable to merchants has been removed, which means that the petition for recognition of the marital share will have to be submitted from the beginning, but with new fees. Another letter states that the tax collectors have delayed the issuance of copies, citing the military garrison in the city, and that one of the adults must take the gift around so that the papers are not lost in the noise. These lines do not speak of evil intentions, but of the friction of the machinery. Power changes, and paperwork requires money, patience, and healthy people capable of traveling on a muddy road. In such conditions, the thesis of honor is used as a blow to the most vulnerable part of the structure: the wife's right to secure ownership and the family's ability to pay on time. Meanwhile, the market ecosystem turns rumor into price. As soon as someone at the inn recounts the couple's quarrel, the interest on the old debt at the moneylender's shop increases by the next day. When extending the loan, they require an adult guarantor who is not related, and in his absence, they pledge not only the future harvest, but also a chest of linen to show that the house is manageable. Letters respond with countermeasures: an urgent note to an influential neighbor for a letter of recommendation, an agreement with the church judge to soon consider the case of the mutual obligations of spouses, and the summoning of adult witnesses from the boundary patrols. Here, we see how everyday life pushes us toward the law. To stop the rate from rising, we need to turn gossip into paper, and paper into a decision, where honor is measured by the column reliability of ownership, and bed by the line security of property. Medical sobriety, devoid of a compassionate tone, also appears in the correspondence. Adult wives fall ill after childbirth. Men suffer from gout and bruises. Servants cough from damp straw. Each such season is a risk of payment disruption. Letters reschedule in advance. They partially convert rent into payment in kind, agree to postpone visits to the office, and change the route of caravans to take advantage of the thaw. The bed is described as a fund of stability. If the mistress is ill, an older relative takes the keys and a list of instructions. If the husband is ill, the manager is given the right to sign expense records within the agreed amount. This is not a novel, but an institution of continuity. A house without a warm room quickly becomes a house without credit. Further on, the essence of the honor equals inheritance twist unfolds. The opponent tries to portray the wife as unmanageable in order to slow down the transfer of the share and gain time for his own lawsuit. The family responds in kind and legally. It demands an inventory of property with the participation of adult witnesses, insists on the participation of an ecclesiastical court to confirm the marriage vow and the legality of joint ownership, and sends a petition to the Chancellery to protect trust ownership through use, so that any exchange or pledge of land requires the consent of all trustees. The letters reveal a sharp pragmatism. If the recognition of joint ownership can be maintained, then honor ceases to be an attackable metaphor and returns to the law column. Then, the bed will once again become what it should be in their understanding, a place where the keys to the chests and the box with copies of titles are kept rather than an argument in a dispute. From rare but poignant fragments, it is clear that abuse of power is experienced as a social fact without details. Sheriffs delay enforcement, judges demand order in the papers, tax collectors hint at the need to speed up the case. The letters do not complain, they build detours. They call on old acquaintances, submit identical copies to different authorities, pay the copyist in advance so that the petition does not get lost in the hustle and bustle of others. In these techniques, love is seen as a willingness to carry the heavy system together. Adult spouses share the burdens equally, choosing not a beautiful scene, but a chair at the clerk's office and the road to the notary. And in this choice, we hear a quiet challenge to the myth of the lyrical era. The truth of the letters is that feeling lives in the stubbornness to fulfill small obligations when strength is running out. Rumors continue to affect the loan, and the family strengthens its defense through public signs of manageability. They re-register part of the rent as a separate entry for the wife to show neighbors and creditors that the share is protected and will be paid regardless of the husband's mood. They conclude a guarantee agreement with relatives with seals to reduce the interest rate. They send a trusted person to the guild house who confirms that the house is not scandalous and works without nighttime disruptions. These steps are boring, but the market loves boredom. The more predictability, the lower the cost of money, and the quieter the conversations in the tavern. One letter notes how, after a copy of the rent agreement was posted on the parish door, a neighbor stopped blowing up the story about unfaithful bedding because the dispute was no longer profitable. Gradually, a roadmap to the finale emerges. The family understands that courts of love do not resolve debts or titles. Compromises with seals resolve them. The letters record a carefully calibrated exchange. The wife receives a share of the rent, separate from her husband's debts. The husband receives the right to conduct ongoing trade without laying claim to her chest. The relatives receive the obligation to act as guarantors at the fair and with the moneylender in exchange for an end to mutual rumors. The court, presided over by an adult servant of the crown, prefers this outcome. Less process, more order. And so, in this narrow corridor, love, money, and bed find themselves in real time. Feelings as discipline when paying the clerk, money as the lifeblood of the home, the bed as a place to store keys, which is once again quiet and protected by paper. The myth of solid lyrics will still live on in songs, but in letters that smell of smoke and dampness, another language has already won. Where lyrics await the feet of jealousy, the document requires an inventory and a signature. Where legend promises pure love, the letter shows an adult deal to protect the wife's share through trustees. Where rumor threatens reprisal, rent recorded in words turns honor into a budget item. And in this dim light, it is clear why this family kept their home longer than many others. They chose form over pathos, and thus disarmed both the market and the court. In winter, when the roads turned to black slush, and messengers took 2 days to travel, where it took half a day in summer, letters began to mention guardianship and holding for use more often. Adult relatives explained that without trusted holders, the wife had no chance of withstanding the onslaught of creditors, especially when the men of the family were in the service of a powerful lord and missed deadlines became the norm. Through this technique of use, the house separated the bed from the debts. Chests of linen and part of the rent were registered to guarantors so that they could not be taken away in the event of a sudden lawsuit. In the margins of one paper, the clerk's hand left a note that the former owner had died without a will, which meant that a dispute over the share could be brought before the ecclesiastical court regarding the marriage vows and promises, and to the chancellery regarding the protection of ownership in favor of the wife. The tightening of the rules was not dramatic. The road to each court cost candles, travel coins, and the health of an adult messenger, who then coughed for a week from the dampness. By the spring thaw, a new form of pressure had spread, doubting the right to manage the household. Opponents discovered that it was cheapest to strike at a woman within the bounds of propriety, with hints of unreasonable spending, a list of delicate habits that in reality meant buying warm sheets after a fever, and noise at night, which boiled down to a quarrel over a clerk's delayed payment. The letters were answered with mirrors. In response, they sent lists of linen, statements of medical expenses, reports from the manager on the state of the barns and skins that had been sold to pay the judge's clerk. It seemed petty, but when compared to the marriage contract, it became a shield. If the house was run according to the rules and obligations were fulfilled, honor was paid for by deeds, not words. From this petty defense grew the most important thing, the stability of the rent. The more detailed the rules of marital life were, the more difficult it was to carry out confiscation under the pretext of misconduct. Rumors continued to gnaw away at credit, and the family set a trap for them. Each fair week began with copies of agreements posted on the parish door. It stated that the wife's share was allocated to a separate stream, that the carters were hired for a fixed term, that the barns were locked, and that the guarantors agreed to seal the payment with their seals. These signs did not stop malicious gossip, but they cooled it with calculation. In the moneylender's shop, the interest rate was kept closer to the previous level because the rent began to be seen as an industrial stream rather than a random act of kindness from the husband. One letter describes how a familiar guild elder refused to sign for a neighbor who was spreading rumors about a dirty bed. After the agreement was posted, the gossip lost its profitability, and the elder preferred not to quarrel with a house whose order was confirmed by paper. Politics weighed heavily on the paper. When power wavered in London, bailiffs and judges changed in the counties, and each time the correspondence became more heated. Adult members of the family tried to recertify copies at the office so as not to depend on the memory of new officials. In letters, this was called bringing to the current date. Sometimes the abuse of power broke out openly. The tax collector lost the decision until he received respect. The sheriff forgot to send summonses if his men were garrisoned with the lord, in whose shadow the lawsuit was taking place. The correspondence recorded this coldly, like drops from the roof. Provide a duplicate, Lay a second track in advance. Conduct the conversation through acquaintances who are clergymen and have a voice in the consistory. There was only one tactic. Do not let the dispute slip into anonymity, where honor becomes an empty sound and the bed becomes someone else's argument. The hardest months were when illness entered the house. Adult women lay in bed for weeks after giving birth. Men returned from military training with inflamed joints. Servants collapsed from wet hay. Letters in those days sounded like an accountant's prayer. Transfer part of the payments in kind. Persuade the miller to grind grain out of turn for the clerk. Bring warm ashes to the house for under the bed. Buy candles for the night for the guards and for writing. One letter carefully records how many nights it took to bring down the fever of an adult mistress and how many pieces of cloth were used for bandages. Below is a line about how many coins the moneylender added for the delay. Here, love looked like a sequence of small decisions in which the house did not give up its right to the future. Pay the clerk today so that the court does not become someone else's toy tomorrow. Meanwhile, the main thread, the dispute over inheritance under the guise of honor, was taking shape. The opponent filed a complaint with the ecclesiastical court about his wife's improper behavior, hoping to undermine her marital share, and in the same season brought a petition to the office to suspend the transfer of the land until the rumor was cleared up. The response was constructed like a well-rehearsed dance. A package left the house containing the oaths of adult witnesses regarding the boundaries, a copy of the marriage agreement, an inventory of the dowry actually brought into the house, and confirmation from the trustees. The letters show how the stopwatch of such a defense counted down the days, to make it in time before the grain harvest so that the rent would not go to a stranger's pledge, to make it in time before the judge changed so that the signatures would not find a reason to renew in favor of the opponent. Delay meant the loss not of poetry, but of bread. City life went on alongside all this, like a background mill. The guilds monitored discipline. A master could be reprimanded for supplying defective fabric, and this record then served as evidence that the house with noise in bed was actually neat in business. The pastor filled out notes about donations for candles and the poor. This also served as an argument. The house was not closed off from the community and had not fallen apart because of scandals. The doctor, who was considered strict, issued short notes. The condition of the adult hostess has stabilized. Visitors can be received. Or conversely, silence is required, and visits from court officials should be postponed. These neutral references, attached to the letters, colored the disputes with the color of regulations rather than passion. In the middle of another year, when the harvest promised to be poor, the family made a painful exchange, which in letters is referred to as peace. There was no generosity in it, but there was the logic of survival. The adult wife was granted a portion of the rent by a separate entry, which could not be pledged by her husband without the consent of the trustees. The husband was granted the right to conduct current trade without touching his wife's chests and linen. The disputed piece of land remained in joint ownership until the weather demarcation, which was to be carried out by an independent surveyor. Relatives on both sides pledged with seals that rumors would be quashed and there would be no more public stone words about the bed. The court accepted this as one accepts glass without bubbles, because it is cheaper for the city, safer for the market, and quieter for the neighbors. From this point on, the letters became drier. They began to talk about everyday life, where yesterday there was a battle for bedroom honor, and today the bedroom is once again a place where the keys to the chests lie, along with a list of instructions for the manager and the half-sleepless peace of an adult housewife. The myth of the lyrical era did not disappear, but receded to where it belonged, in the hall in front of the fireplace of a wandering singer. A different kind of power remained in the boxes under the stairs. Certified copies of contracts, lists of dowries, certificates of boundaries, letters to clerks and judges with their stingy notes. It is this archive that is the real diary of love, money, and bed in the present tense. It shows not feelings at their peak, but choices at a turning point. Paying the clerk when your hand hurts, hanging up the agreement when you are ashamed, running the house when the court is not at home. And in this dim light, it is clear why the legend of love songs does not stand up to comparison with the document. The novel loses its voice where the seal protects bread. By summer, when the office had recounted the barn locks and updated the lists of guarantors, the letters began to resemble a quiet record of survival. In one message, an adult manager asks to replace part of the monetary rent with grain and wool, so as not to touch the supply of candles and not to disrupt the clerk's payment. In another, it is indicated that the keys to the chests remain with the mistress and her confidants, and the chests are entered in the inventory as property outside the pledge under the marriage agreement. It is also briefly noted that the bed in the main room is once again considered peaceful, that is, suitable for receiving guests and for those who have come to sign papers to stay overnight. There is no poetry in these words, only a return to the normal flow of life, where the silence of the night protects the credit of the day. Rumors are still trying to rear their heads, but now there is a paper posted on the parish door working against them. A separate record of the wife's rent, a list of trusted holders, the oaths of adult witnesses, and the consent of the parties to an independent land surveyor. The moneylender looks at the seals and leaves the interest rate unchanged. The guild elder, seeing the signatures, removes the reservation from the delivery. In a letter smelling of smoke and dampness, it looks like a few dry lines. The duty has been paid in words. Copies have been brought up to date. Peace has been observed. Thus, the compromise, hard won in court, turns honor back into law and takes the bed from the courtroom to the house, where it belongs, next to the chests and bundles of keys. The last knot is untied without heroism. The parties confirm through the office. The disputed plot of land shall not be mortgaged by anyone until the final demarcation. The wife's marital share will be held by trustees so that no short-term debt will take away her future. Rumors of unreasonable management will be considered slander and punished with a fine. If repeated, they will be transferred to the common law courts. The court does not utter lofty words, it simply puts signatures and seals in the proper order. In letters, this is noted with 2 extra lines about travel expenses and candles, and 1 line stating that after the peace, the servants have returned to their schedule, and the housekeeper is once again responsible for the laundry and clean sheets, because people whose signatures are needed tomorrow are once again spending the night in the house. From the outside, this is overshadowed by big politics. The war for the crown did not end in a single day, and some patrons disappear from correspondence as suddenly as they appeared. But now, the family has something that is stronger than anyone's favor: a box with copies, sworn oaths, and written words. If the judge changes tomorrow, the package of documents is ready. If the moneylender tries to raise the rate, a copy of the agreement with seals hangs on the door. If the neighbor remembers honor, there will be adult witnesses of the boundary survey at the threshold. Love here continues to be not a song, but a discipline. To put a bowl of warm water by the bed when you need to go to the office. To bring candles for the poor to the pastor's table when they whisper in the tavern. Not to let a nighttime quarrel turn into daytime interest. The myth of the lyrical era is stubborn, but the document is more insistent. Bundles of letters show that marriage is a bundle of contracts and keys. Honor is a scale of rights to land and rent, and bed is an indicator of the manageability of the house. In these envelopes, delivered through rain and mud, intimacy is not a secret sigh, but a table of fulfilled obligations. Who appeared at the office, who brought a witness, who paid the copyist, who posted copies on the doors. The ending is not brilliant, it works. Court and compromise take the place of courts of love, because the market demands predictability, and the house demands silence in which sheets dry and papers rustle. The outcome is based on human decisions. The adult mistress kept the keys and her share, because day after day she signed minor assignments without giving them to the mercy of rumor. The adult husband did not trade the disputed land for a short-term loan because he agreed to trusted holders. Relatives took on the guarantee to extinguish the fire of gossip. The judge preferred a boring peace to a beautiful conflict because he saw how rumors destroy credit and credit destroys bread. Thus, the letters left behind not a legend but instructions. How to weather the storm with words, seals, and stubborn order so that love, money, and bed do not become someone else's prey.